Good morning. Happy Sunday. This is Pastor Ralph again. Let's get right into God's Word. I'm going to open in a word of prayer, and I'm going to share with you out of the book of James, and I'm going to share my devotion of what I was reading this week and how special it was to me, and I pray that it's a blessing to you. Father, we thank you again as we approach your word, as we fellowship centered around your truth. We ask, Lord, that you enlighten us, that you give us the opportunity to please you in ways, Lord, by faith, and that we understand what our responsibility is in these last days. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's get right into it. James chapter 1, and it's entitled in my devotion, the testing of your faith, which encompasses so many aspects of your Christian walk. And many people have little understanding, if at all any, about what it means to be tested. Sometimes they think God is doing stuff to them or the devil's doing stuff to them. But I want you to know, after reading this verse by verse, you're going to get some clarity on what testing your faith is. The important thing to know about the test is that the test is not for you personally, but it's about testing your faith. When you say you have faith, you've studied, you've acted in belief, you've moved towards God and trusting Him. That's what's being tested, not you as a person. And so you want to be careful of your declarations and the things that you say that you believe, because the enemy only sees that you're professing things. He will mount a test against the things that you profess. Sometimes people talk too much. They say more than they should. It's best to be quiet and to have more action when it comes to the things of God. So let's start out in James chapter 1, and I'll start reading at verse 1. And it says this: James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 who are dispersed abroad, greetings. In verse 2, he says this. He gets right into it. He says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials." And trials are like tests. They are things that mount against you. They're adversarial. They're things to really press in on you to see what it is that you say you believe. And so it's not a strange thing that everybody has a trial or a test. It's so different than going to school and studying all year long and then having little tests along the way to indicate what you've retained, that in the last or the final time you take the final test, and that tells us pretty much where you are education wise. Well, the same thing here. If you've been traveling in the Word for a while, you've been going to church, you've been studying with believers, well, the enemy wants to know where your faith is. And it's a good idea for you to know where your faith is as well. So he says, consider it joy. That's the strange thing for most people. Why would I be joyful about a test that I'm going through when it seems that the test is really causing a lot of stress on my life, causing a lot of problems to me and to other people? I mean, people go through hardships all the time. I know people who think, man, every time I get out of one trial, I enter another one. That's a confession that you're making. That's something you believe. Now your belief system is in operation when you believe that every time you come through one, you have to enter another one. So that's not necessarily the thing that God is placing you on. There's not always a test all the time, but if that's what you think, then you feel like everything that happens is a test. And the problem is sometimes we think it's God. And I'm here to tell you today, it may be God or it may not be God. So you really have to study the circumstance in which you're in. Did you bring this upon yourself, or is this something that the enemy's doing because you have faith? We'll find out as we read a little further. So he says, consider it all joy. So God requires us to be joyful when we encounter various trials, and various means many different types. Now, the reason we're to experience joy or to have joy as the forerunner is in verse 3. So if you take a look at verse 3, this is why we're joyful. We're not joyful because we're crazy or we love testing, we love trials, we love all this hardship. No, we're joyful because of verse 3, knowing that the testing of your faith, let me stop right there, not the testing of you, but the testing of your faith. And so he says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And endurance is another word for patience. When a person learns to endure, a person learns to be patient with the process, and that's important. So consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing, don't forget the knowing part, that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And what is endurance for? The next verse, this step by step line by line, tells us exactly. So we don't have to read into it. We don't have to guess about it, but we can know. Verse 4 says, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So the job of endurance is to complete us, is to fulfill us, is to give us a sense of fullness and completeness in the things of God. So when you look at it like that, and let, that means permit and allow endurance to have its perfect result. In other words, let the process begin and let the process end. What process? The process of when testing you starts to produce endurance in you. When endurance shows up, let endurance do the work so the result can be that you are perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Now, he goes on to say in verse 5, but if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. I think that's appropriate because we would lack wisdom when we don't understand what God is doing. So what God is saying is, while you're going through the test of your faith, and while endurance and patience is being produced so that you can lack no thing in your life that you really need, he says that if you lack wisdom, the know-how to be able to stand in the midst of a trial or fiery test, he says, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously without reproach, it will be given to him. So what God has done is opened up his checkbook and said to us, if you come to me and you ask me for wisdom, he says, I won't punish you for doing that. I won't make you feel bad for asking. He says, I'll give it to you with no reproach. So that's one of the things in the Bible that you can go to God on a daily basis, on a regular basis, and ask for wisdom. And I would say, if you need to ask for wisdom 10 times a day, make sure of what you're asking for the wisdom so that you can use it for what it is that you're asking for. Some people will just say, oh, God, just give me wisdom. Wisdom for what? Maybe you should ask God, give me wisdom on how to do my job better. Give me wisdom on how to raise my children. Give me wisdom to deal with the difficult problems in my life and situations that I need to address. I need wisdom for something. You just don't ask God for wisdom and do nothing with it, because wisdom has to have a reason to be there. And so when Solomon asked God for wisdom, he asked God for wisdom and understanding so he would know how to rule so great a people of God. He wanted to know how to be a great king, how to be a great servant to the people of God. So he asked God for wisdom because he just didn't know. And sometimes we're going to find ourselves in situations that we just don't know what to do. So God, when I'm in this situation right here, I'm asking you for wisdom on how to appropriately, govern and regulate myself so that I pass the test and the trial, and that I allow the endurance that's being built from that to have its perfect result, so that at the end I'll be thorough, complete, lacking in no thing. And I thank you for that wisdom for that. So if you need wisdom for a particular thing, ask God for it. Don't seek other people, seek the Lord. Now, if God directs you to someone else after you ask him, you might be getting some support and some common sense and wisdom from another person. But always go to God in prayer, because it says here, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask your dad. Let him ask your mom. Let him ask your grandma. Let him ask your boss. No, it says ask of God, who gives to all men. So he didn't even have a respect of persons here. He said he gives to all men. And then what I love about this is he does it generously. He doesn't just allow a little bit to come out. He generously, with a great generosity, he gives you the wisdom without reproach, without reprimanding you, and says he'll give it to you, but you got to do the asking. And so when we get through these tests, and we will get through them, the object of a test is to get through it and to retain what you've learned. Now, let's go down to verse 6. And it says this: if you're going to ask God for something, here's the criteria in which we have to ask. And you have to really check your heart when it comes to this kind of stuff, because a lot of times people are asking God for things unattached to being responsible for what they're asking for, not exhibiting the faith nor the belief to be able to trust him in the thing they're asking for. They're just asking just for the sake of asking. So, but let him ask in faith without any doubting. So that kind of self-explanatory. Let him ask in faith without any doubting. So what would it look like to ask God for something in faith. He says it right there, without any doubting. So if I'm going to be a person of faith, I can't come to God doubting. Doubting will cancel out what you're asking for. If you're trusting God and having confidence in God in an area of your life, whether it be a business that you just started, whether it be a family you're trying to raise, whether it's a new thing to you, and you come to God in faith, trusting Him, looking for His support, He says, don't doubt me then. If I'm going to do something for you, you can't doubt me. You have to trust me. So you got to, before you ask God for something, you got to really think about, is this what I really want? Is this what I really need? So that I don't have any conversations in my head while I'm asking God for something, telling me you're not going to get it. God won't do that for you. Maybe you have some sin in your life and you're thinking, well, God won't do it unless my life is right. I always hear people say, I got to get my act together before God bless me. Quite the contrary. The fact that God blesses you has nothing to do with your act being right. The fact that your act isn't right is why God blesses you. So yes, it's good to be obedient. It's learn to be mature and to grow to a point to where you're obedient to God and you listen to Him, and that, you know, you're living by faith and you're pleasing to Him. But that's not the criteria. God blessed us while we were yet in sin. He sent Christ to die for the ungodly. So how much more would He do something for you because of the need that you have? You know, He's a father. And if you have children, you may not want to help the children when they don't do what you want them to do, but because they're your children, you're going to help them and you're going to bless them. But what happens is when you're obedient and you're faithful, you do more for your children. In the same way, God does more for those, and He gives favor to those who are obedient. But He says here in verse 6, listen, but let him ask in faith without any doubting. He says, for the one who doubts, He gives this example. This is what you're like when you're starting to doubt. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by wind. So when you're out there on the water, let's say you're a little small boat, and the wind is blowing you one way and the sea is rocking you this way. He says that's what it's like when you say you have faith, you have doubt. You're up, you're down, you're east, you're west. You just never come to stability to trust God. Now listen, verse 7, for let not that man, what man are we talking about? The man that's doubting. Let not that man expect to receive anything from the Lord. Because if you're doubting, your expectation has to be faith. So you drive out doubting by trusting and believing. And how does faith look when you believe God? Faith is an action word. It's a verb. It's something you do. You see, and so doubting will cast a black cloud over your ability to do something. It causes you to be unstable. Like he says, like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by all the wind that is out there. He says, for let not that man that is going back and forth, expect that he would receive anything from the Lord. Now here's a huge piece that we need to understand. We can't even have an expectation that we would receive anything from the Lord until our minds are made up. So it would be my advice to you and to myself is that before I come to God, I need to decide on what I really want from Him. I need to know that I know that I know that this is the thing that I'm asking for, and this is the thing that I'm believing for. And is this something that God promises in His Word, or am I asking for things outside of the covenant? Do I just ask God for any old thing? You know, in John 15:7, He says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, it shall be done for you. And the responsibility of that statement is that if you abide in me and my words abide in you, that will help you to understand that I would never ask God for anything that He hasn't promised me. And if I'm abiding in Him and His words in me, that's going to be a foundation for what I'm asking for, because I begin to know at some point when I'm in the Word what's promised to me. And I begin to know the difference between what I need and what I want. But here's the thing. If what you want and what you need become the same thing, then God will answer your needs and your want. Because the more maturity that you get in the Word and the more you listen to God and learn His voice, you're only going to want those things that God wants for you. And you start to realize that you don't need a whole lot of other stuff. And so most prayer failures begin with the fact that people don't understand the difference between needs and wants, and not really understanding that your wants and needs could be the same thing if you're focused on the Lord. So he says, for let not that man, verse 7, expect that he would receive anything from the Lord. And this is why. Being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. The interesting fact about verse 8, he says, you are double-minded when you're double-minded, when you can't make a decision, when you can't decide. He says you're a double-minded person. And then he says that causes you to be unstable in all your ways. So you might be double-minded in one area of your life, but being double-minded will cause your whole life to become unstable. So that's an important thing to realize, that your double-mindedness could be shaking your whole entire life and everything about you. So you want to make sure that you're making decisions based on the promises of God. Make sure that you're having faith. Make sure that you understand that these are tests that we go through, and that we're building patience and endurance to get through the test so that we can lack no thing. And when you get to a place where you allow patience and endurance to have its perfect result in your life, you won't lack anything. Therefore, when you go to God in prayer, there won't be a whole lot that you're asking for personally. There'll be more that you're asking for outside of yourself to be a blessing to other people. Because he said again in verse 4, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete. Listen, lacking in nothing. Well, if I'm lacking in nothing, then that means I don't have any great needs or wants. So I guess the secret here would be learning to have endurance, finish its course, and finish its progression in your life. That's important. Now, he goes on to say in verse 9, but let a brother of humble circumstances glory in his high position, and let the rich man glory in his humiliation. He says, because like the flowering grass, he shall pass away. We all have a temporary life. It says this in verse 11, for the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and the flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. Now watch. So too, the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will all fade away. So he's talking about our focus and what we should be doing, what we should be after, whether we're rich or poor. Our focus should be on Jesus. Now watch this in verse 12. He goes on to say, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. Now over here, he says who endures. So perseverance and endurance run together. So blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. So that means as I persevere, I allow endurance and patience to work in my life. So I'll be blessed when I'm facing a trial. Now watch this. For once he has been approved. So now we have to get approval of the life that we're living when it comes to the testing that we go through. Just like when you get a final grade in a class. Once that grade has been given, that gives approval to whether you go on to the next grade or whether you may have to repeat yourself. And one of the reasons I found in our life why we keep repeating the same old problems and the same circumstances and situations in our life, because we haven't passed the test and been approved. Watch. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, watch, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. He promised a crown of life to those who love him. Now, we'll go down. It's going to shift gears a little bit in verse 13. He says, let no one say when he is tempted, get this, I am being tempted by God. And I have to stop right there for a minute, because sometimes, that sounds like double talk, because we know when we go back into the Old Testament, one of the things I want to say about the Old Testament, you're talking about a manuscript, a covenant that was not written to the New World, New Testament believing saints. It was written to Israel, and it was a history and documentation of how God dealt with his people all the way through to the New Testament. So we know when God tested Abraham, because it just said here, let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. Well, we know he tempted or tested Abraham. But the difference between what God did with Abraham and what the devil does, God tests you to prove you and approve you by faith. Well, the devil tests to disprove you and discourage your faith. That's the big difference. So God would never put something in front of you to do that he was not going to help you get through it. In other words, the devil will put something in front of you to make you fail at it and fail miserably, to discredit the relationship you have with God. So when it says God doesn't tempt anybody, he doesn't tempt anybody. Why? Watch this. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. So the subject matter here is, does God tempt us with evil? Well, the Bible says no, God can't be tempted with evil, and he doesn't tempt any one of us with evil. And see, the enemy will come along with evil, and he will tempt you to do something that discredits your walk, makes you feel shame, makes you feel like God's not with you and you're not with God. And that's his whole thing, is to try to make you look bad. And in Job, that whole story of Job, the Bible, what was so unique about Job, God said to the devil, to the adversary, rather, let's just call him the adversary. He said, have you considered my servant Job? He is upright, perfect, and blameless. So God didn't send Job into a situation that he didn't think Job could conquer. God knew that Job had his faith in him. And he knew that anything that the devil threw at Job, Job was going to rely on God to be able to get himself through it. And that's what the devil accused Job of. He really serves you for nothing because you've done everything for him. If I take this from him and I take that from him, he will curse you to his face. But remember, God said Job was upright, perfect, and blameless. But what he didn't say is that Job was sinless. See, you can be blameless and still be a sinner, because a person who is a sinner will come to God through repentance and conviction and then become blameless. So it's important. Don't think that when evil or bad things are happening that God is the one doing it to try to teach you something. And I often said this, if it was bad stuff that caused us to be perfected and to get closer to God, we should be so close to God. We've all had so many bad things happen in our life. It can't be true that bad stuff gets you closer to God. What happens is when bad things happen, it makes us cry out to God, or it makes us angry at God. And if you get angry with God, then we find out really what's in it for you. You're only serving God to get something, like the devil accused Job of. But we found out when you read the whole story of Job, he did not serve God for what he could get. He served God because he was God the creator. And that's what we got to get back to. So he says, let no one say I'm being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil. No evil ever tempts God. He says, and he himself does not tempt anyone. So the subject there is evil. Now watch, he goes on to say, this is so important that we get a hold of this, because once we learn this, we can have right theology when it comes to God. And verse 14, but each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. So where we get into trouble is with what is inside of us, our own lust, our own evil. Verse 15, here's the process of what happens when you get tempted and enticed and you get drawn away. Verse 15, then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. What that tells me is that lust starts out, but lust then becomes sin. And it's almost like when you start to lust, and what that really is a desire. You start to have a desire for something, whatever it is. You know, it's not like just one thing. It could be many things. He says, then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, look at the progression and the process here. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. So before you get to death, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen. You have to conceive it. You have to birth it, you have to accomplish it, and you got to bring forth the thing and manifest it. He says in verse 16, he says, do not be deceived, my brethren. He says, my beloved brethren, every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above. So he gives us the understanding that every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above, not below. He says, coming down from the Father of lights. Get this, with whom There is no variation or shifting shadow. I love that. Verse 18, in the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we might be, as it were, the first fruits among all creation. Now, let me get down to this last piece as I'm winding this up. He says in verse 19, he says, this you know, my beloved brethren, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. He says, therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, in humility, receive the word implanted or engrafted, as the King James says, which is able to save your soul. And closing with this in verse 22, listen, all the way from over here, understanding the trials, the tests, the endurance, the faith and generosity of God, and learning how to not doubt and be double-minded. He says, but prove yourselves doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive or delude themselves. And see, and that's so important. If you're going to see God operate in your life, you got to hear what he says and become a doer of what he says, and not be vacillating back and forth double-mindedly. Understand that the nature of temptation does not come with evil. If it's coming from God, it comes as a good thing to make sure that your patience and your endurance will lack nothing in your life. You will receive what God has set aside for you, and you'll be the better for it. That's what I have for you in the name of Jesus. Amen.